I never expected the betrayal to come so quietly. Sitting across from the lawyer, I held my breath as he slid a stack of documents across the polished mahogany table. My parents sat beside me, my brother just a seat away. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. I had spent 5 years of my life paying off their mortgage, ensuring they had a home, sacrificing things I wanted, all because I believed in family. And yet, as I flipped through the papers, a slow, creeping realization settled into my bones. My name was nowhere on them. I blinked, my fingers tightening around the pages. "There must be a mistake," I said, forcing a calm tone. "I don't see my name here." The lawyer cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "The house has been officially transferred to your brother," he explained. "Your parents made the decision some time ago." Silence. The weight of their betrayal pressed against my chest, suffocating me. I turned to my mother first, searching her face for some kind of explanation, some ounce of guilt. She wouldn't even meet my eyes. My father sat stiffly, arms crossed, as if daring me to make a scene. But it was my brother's expression that sealed it. That smug, satisfied grin as he leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers against the table. They had planned this. Why? My voice came out quieter than I intended, but every syllable was laced with tension. "I paid for this house. I kept the mortgage afloat. I made sure you never had to worry. And you just," my breath hitched, "handed it over to him?" My mother finally spoke, her voice soft, almost rehearsed. "Sweetheart, you already have a good job. You're stable. Your brother, he needs this more than you." I laughed. A hollow, bitter laugh. My brother, who had never held a steady job, who spent his days partying, who borrowed money he never intended to repay. He needed this more than me? I turned to my father. "And you agree with this?" He exhaled sharply, his face void of emotion. "It's done. There's nothing more to discuss." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. 5 years. 5 years of sacrifices. 5 years of believing I was building something, securing a future for our family, for all of us. And yet, the moment everything was finally stable, they handed it over to him, like I had just been a placeholder, a means to an end. I should have exploded. I should have screamed, accused, demanded answers. But instead I did something that unsettled them more. I smiled. Not out of joy. Not even out of sarcasm. It was a cold, knowing smile. The kind that made my mother shift uncomfortably in her chair. The kind that made my father glance at me with something almost like concern. The kind that wiped the smirk clean off my brother's face. I set the papers down carefully, smoothing them out with my fingers. "All right," I said simply. My mother blinked. "What?" I said, "All right." I pushed the documents back toward the lawyer and leaned back in my chair. "If that's what you've decided, then so be it." My brother frowned, clearly thrown off. "You're not mad?" I tilted my head slightly. "Should I be?" His lips parted as if to say something, but no words came out. For the first time in a long time, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He expected me to fight, to beg, to cause a scene. That was the outcome he had braced for. But my silence, my acceptance, that was something he didn't know how to handle. The lawyer shifted in his seat. "Well, if there are no objections, I'll proceed with finalizing the transfer." "No objections," I cut in smoothly. "I completely understand my parents' decision." My father narrowed his eyes slightly, sensing something off in my tone. My mother tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. My brother, though he was still wary, still trying to gauge whether he had truly won. I reached for my bag and stood. "Thanks for the update. I appreciate the clarity." As I turned to leave, my mother called after me, her voice hesitant. "Sweetheart, you're not upset, are you?" I paused at the door, gripping the handle just tight enough that my knuckles turned white. Then I looked over my shoulder and gave them one final, unreadable smile. Why would I be upset? And with that I walked out. My heart was pounding, adrenaline thrumming through my veins. The betrayal had cut deep, deeper than I thought possible. But I wasn't going to let them see me break. No, this wasn't over. Because while they thought they had outplayed me, they had no idea what I had in store for them. I walked out of that office without looking back. The cold air hit my face as I stepped onto the sidewalk, but I barely felt it. My hands were steady, my breathing even. But inside, a storm was raging. Betrayal like that doesn't just disappear. It doesn't settle. It festers. It grows into something dark and unshakable. They thought they had one. I let them. I spent the next few weeks exactly as they expected. Silent, distant. My mother sent me texts, brief and cautious. Hope you're doing okay. You know we love you. My father never reached out. My brother? He was too busy celebrating his victory to even pretend to care. I didn't respond. That I watched. I made excuses not to visit the house that was no longer mine. But I kept tabs on everything, little details they wouldn't even think twice about. My brother wasn't the type to handle responsibility well, and it showed almost immediately. He wasn't just reckless, he was entitled. The utilities were still in my name. They hadn't bothered to switch them over. I let the bills pile up, watched late fees stack higher and higher. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the control. They had legally removed me from the house, but the house itself? It was still tied to me in ways they hadn't considered. Then there was the mortgage. I had spent 5 years making every payment, ensuring they never had to worry. But now, it was in his hands. And my brother had never been responsible for anything in his life. I needed to know just how deep he was digging himself. One afternoon I parked a few blocks away and walked past the house, my hood pulled up against the wind. It looked the same on the surface. But as I got closer, the small details told a different story. The grass hadn't been cut. A few trash bags sat near the curb untouched for days. The porch light flickered, needing a new bulb. Neglect. It was happening faster than I thought. I kept walking, not slowing down, not making it obvious. But I knew. This was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks I gathered information quietly, methodically. I checked property tax records, monitored bank activity in ways they wouldn't notice. My brother had no idea how much went into maintaining a house. He assumed it would be as effortless as everything else in his life, just another thing handed to him without strings. But the cracks were already forming. A month after the paperwork was finalized, my mother finally called. "Hey sweetheart," she said, her voice light but forced. "We haven't seen you in a while. Maybe you could stop by this weekend." I could hear something underneath the casual tone. Something uneasy. "Can't," I replied smoothly. "Busy with work." Pause. Then softer. "Are you still upset?" I let the silence stretch. Let her feel the weight of her own question. "I'm fine," I finally said. "But you should probably check on him." "Who?" I almost laughed. "Who else?" "Your son," I said simply, then hung up. I didn't need to say more. It took 2 more weeks before I got what I was waiting for. The house was slipping out of his control and he was too proud to ask for help. I could see it in the way he stopped posting pictures of his new place online. The celebrations died down. The flashy spending slowed. The cracks weren't just forming, they were splitting wide open. Then finally the call came. Not from my parents. From him. "Hey," my brother said, trying to sound casual. So, quick question." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice neutral. "What's up?" "So, do you know anything about, mortgage stuff?" I smiled. He was unraveling faster than I had anticipated. "A little," I said. "Why?" A hesitation. Then forced laughter. "No reason, just, things are a little tight right now. Taxes are crazy and utilities are, insane. I don't know how you handled this for so long." I bit back a response. Because I was responsible. Because I wasn't a leech. Because I didn't expect the world to cater to me. Instead, I let out a thoughtful hum. "Yeah, homeownership isn't easy. But I'm sure you'll figure it out." Silence. I could hear him waiting, expecting me to offer help. To step in like I always had. Not this time. "Anyway," I said, feigning indifference. "Hope things work out for you." And I hung up. The plan wasn't finished. Not yet. But I had just taken my first step. I set my phone down and exhaled slowly. That call had confirmed what I already knew. My brother was drowning. But this wasn't just about watching him struggle. I needed to make sure that when he finally reached his breaking point, there was only one way out. My way. I had been planning for this moment long before he even realized he was in trouble. The first thing I did was take back what was mine. The utilities were still under my name. I had let them pile up, but now? It was time to pull the plug. Literally. Late one night I logged into my account and clicked a few buttons. Electricity? Disconnected. Water? Shut off. Internet? Gone. Within 24 hours my brother's house, my house, became a tomb. No lights, no heat, no running water. The text came first. Hey, did the power company mess up or something? Everything's off. I didn't respond. A few hours later, another message. Seriously, can you help me out? I don't know what's going on. Still silence. The calls started next. I ignored every single one. Then, just as I had expected, just as I had counted on, he called our mother. I kept my distance, but I knew exactly how the conversation played out. My mother, confused, would try to call me. When I didn't answer, she'd get frustrated. Why wasn't I stepping in? That's what she expected me to do. That's what I had always done. But this time I let the silence stretch. Hours turned into days. My brother scrambled for solutions, but solutions required money, and he had none. His job barely covered his reckless spending. He had no emergency savings. No backup plan. And now, with no utilities, no way to live in the house comfortably, he was running out of options. That's when I made my next move. One morning, I took a detour on my way to work, driving past the house again. This time, I didn't just glance at the porch or the uncut grass. I noticed something new, something that confirmed everything was going exactly as I had planned. The for sale by owner sign. I almost laughed. He was trying to sell it. Not surprising. He was desperate. He couldn't afford the mortgage, the utilities were gone, and he was realizing, maybe for the first time in his life, that things didn't magically work out just because he wanted them to. But selling a house isn't as easy as listing it online. There were inspections, appraisals, and most importantly, legal complications. And that's where I had already placed my next trap. I had been digging into the mortgage records for weeks. Though my parents had transferred the house to my brother, the loan itself was still tangled in the years of payments I had made. So I made a phone call. Hi, I need some information about an outstanding mortgage balance. A few transfers later, I had what I needed. My name wasn't just on some of the payments. It was on the history of the loan itself. I had been the primary contributor for 5 years. And that meant something very important. Before my brother could sell that house, the mortgage lender would need my cooperation. I sat back, gripping my phone tightly. Checkmate. The next call I got was from my mother. Why are you doing this? She asked, voice tight with frustration. Doing what? Said my tone cool. Your brother, he's in trouble. He's trying to sell the house, but now there's an issue with the mortgage and they're saying you have to sign off on something. That's interesting, I mused. Maybe he should have thought of that before taking everything from me. A long silence. You can't hold this over him forever, she finally said. I let out a short laugh. Watch me. I hung up. My plan wasn't finished yet. Not even close. The house sat empty. For the first time in months, no lights flickered behind the curtains, no faint sounds of the TV hummed through the walls. My brother had left, forced to abandon the home he had once flaunted like a trophy. But this wasn't over yet. I knew exactly where he had gone. My parents' house. And if I knew them like I thought I did, they were all huddled together at the kitchen table, whispering, panicking, trying to figure out how everything had unraveled so fast. I didn't have to wait long for the call. It came in the middle of the afternoon. My mother's name flashed across my screen. I let it ring twice before answering, keeping my voice steady, uninterested. You happy now? She asked, skipping the pleasantries. I leaned back in my chair. Define happy. Your brother is out of the house. He can't sell it. He can't afford it. And now the mortgage company is involved. What do you want from us? I let the silence stretch just enough to make her squirm. An apology would be a start, I finally said. She scoffed. You think this is about an apology? Considering you and Dad let me bleed for 5 years to keep that house standing while you secretly handed it to him? Yeah, I think it is. I could hear her inhale sharply like she was ready to fire off another excuse, another reason why I was overreacting. But then something changed. She exhaled. Fine. We made a mistake. I raised an eyebrow. We. Your father and I. We thought we were doing what was best for both of you. I laughed, sharp and bitter. Best for me? Really? Because from where I'm sitting it looks like you did what was best for him. Used me. You let me carry the weight while he reaped the rewards. No. Now you want me to fix it. She didn't respond. Because we both knew the truth. They had never expected me to fight back. The next day I drove past my parents' house. My brother's car was in the driveway. I could picture him inside, slumped over the table, waiting for them to work their magic. Waiting for Mom and Dad to smooth things over like they always did. I parked a block away and stepped out. This wasn't a confrontation. Not yet. I just wanted to see it for myself. As I got closer, I heard voices through the open kitchen window. My father's low grumble, my mother's tight, worried tone, and my brother's sharp, defensive. I didn't know the mortgage was tied up like that. You should have checked before trying to sell the house, Eric. How was I supposed to know? You guys said it was mine. It was yours, but we didn't think. No, you didn't think. You just assumed I'd be fine, and now I have nothing. I stood there for a moment just listening. For the first time, my brother wasn't the golden child. He was just another problem they had to solve. And they had no idea how to fix it. The That night my father called me. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. Son, he started, his voice calmer than my mother's had been. We need to talk. I waited. We made a mistake, he admitted. Not just with the house but with everything. We should have handled things differently. I didn't say anything. We were wrong to assume you'd always be there to pick up the pieces. I let out a slow breath. And he hesitated. And we're asking for your help. There was not an apology. Not regret. A request. They wanted me to clean up their mess. I stared at my phone, shaking my head. You're only saying this because you have no choice. That's not true, he argued. It is. If Eric had managed to sell the house and make a profit, would you be calling me now? Silence. I nodded to myself. That's what I thought. Listen, we just need to. I hung up. They had realized their mistake. But that didn't mean I had to fix it for them. I stared at my phone for a long time after hanging up. No anger. No resentment. Just quiet. It was strange how weightless I felt. For years I had carried them. My parents, my brother, the expectations they had never placed on him but had gladly dumped onto me. I had spent my 20s sacrificing, bending, breaking myself for a family that only saw me as a means to an end. And now they were the ones drowning. I had every reason to feel satisfied. But closure isn't about satisfaction. It's about knowing when to walk away. The next morning I went to my parents' house. Not to argue. Not to explain. Just to end things properly. Their car was in the driveway. The blinds were cracked open just enough for them to peek through, watching, waiting. They knew I was coming. Maybe they thought I'd change my mind, that I'd take on the burden again like I always had. But this wasn't the past. I walked up the steps, knocking once. My mother answered, her face drawn tight with exhaustion. She stepped aside without a word, letting me in. The house felt smaller than I remembered. The walls, once warm with childhood memories, now held nothing for me. Just shadows of a past I no longer belonged to. I found my father in the kitchen, sitting at the table with his hands clasped. My brother leaned against the counter, arms crossed, jaw set. He still looked like he was waiting for someone to swoop in and fix everything for him. I took my time looking at them, letting them feel the weight of what they had done. Then I spoke. I'm done. My mother's head jerked up. Done with what? With all of this, I said, gesturing between us. The house, the money, the guilt trips. All of it. My father exhaled slowly. Son, you're only talking to me because you need something, I cut in. Not because you regret what you did. Not because you want to make things right. Just because you got caught in your own mess. My brother scoffed. So what? You're just gonna walk away? Act like we never existed. I met his gaze, steady and calm. You already did that to me. I'm just following your example. He opened his mouth to argue, but for once he had nothing to say. My mother, though, wasn't ready to let go. But we're family. Are we? I asked quietly. Because for 5 years I was just a wallet to you. A backup plan. A convenient option. And when I wasn't needed anymore, you cut me out like it was nothing. Her face crumpled. Maybe for the first time she really saw it. Saw me. I turned to my father. You asked me to fix this. To help. But what you really meant was, clean up the mess we made. And I won't. I don't owe you that. He looked away. I nodded to myself. That was all the answer I needed. I walked to the front door, my parents trailing behind me. Wait, my mother pleaded, her voice shaking. Please. Don't do this. We can talk about it. But we'd had years to talk. No. I was done talking. I stepped outside. The sun was warm against my face, the air crisp. The world hadn't changed. But I had. I turned back one last time, looking at the house, at them. The people who had raised me. The people I had loved. I didn't hate them. I just didn't belong to them anymore. Then I closed the door behind me. And I never looked back.